What if the person who wishes you good night every evening is also writing a report about you? What if your grandmother, your friend, even your child were part of a secret surveillance system without fully realizing it? What if cameras and informants were not a horror, but a way to show love for the state? In this video, you'll learn how the head of the Stasi, Erich Mielke, built one of the most sophisticated empires of fear in modern history. We'll show you photos that were never meant to be archived and reveal the psychological experiment that engulfed an entire country. Why did he keep evidence of his crimes instead of destroying it? Who conducted secret house searches while people slept? And how did fear become an official religion for millions? Don't turn off this video, because at the end, you'll see what even Mielke failed to understand. How surveillance destroys not only society, but the observer himself. The morning ritual never changed. 7 o'clock sharp, every single day. Erich Mielke would arrive at his office and immediately reach for the telephone. His first question was always the same. What happened overnight? Nothing could occur in East Germany without his knowledge. Border crossings, passport checks, suspicious conversations overheard in cafes. Every detail flowed upward to his desk, where it joined an ever-growing web of information. But Mielke wasn't just collecting intelligence. He was constructing something far more ambitious, a society where privacy itself became impossible. The photographs in his album capture moments that seem routine. Construction workers laying concrete, officials shaking hands at ceremonies, border guards standing at their posts. Yet each image represents a calculated step toward total control. Consider this. Why would someone document their own operations so thoroughly? Intelligence agencies typically destroy evidence, not preserve it. Unless, of course, these photographs served a different purpose entirely. Perhaps they were proof of loyalty. Or maybe they were insurance, meant to protect their creator if political winds shifted. The album suggests Mielke understood something his contemporaries missed. That power isn't just about controlling people, but about controlling the narrative of that control. His office held clues to this obsession. While other East German officials displayed portraits of party leaders, Mielke had commissioned an oil painting of the Berlin Wall itself. The artwork depicted the Brandenburg Gate forever sealed, with state and party safely protected behind concrete and steel. This wasn't decoration. It was a daily reminder of his life's work, a visual manifesto of his deepest beliefs about human nature and social order. The construction photographed in his album wasn't just about building barriers. It was about building a new kind of state, where the line between protector and predator became deliberately blurred. Each photograph reveals layers of meaning that become more disturbing with careful examination. A seemingly innocent image of workers installing streetlights near the border actually documents the creation of a surveillance network. Those lights weren't just for visibility. They were positioned to eliminate shadows where people might hide, to create zones of constant illumination where escape became impossible. Another photograph shows what appears to be a routine meeting between officials, but the body language tells a different story. Notice how Mielke positions himself slightly apart from the group, how his eyes seem to be cataloging rather than participating. Even among allies, he maintained the psychological distance of a professional observer. The album suggests that Mielke had internalized a fundamental truth about intelligence work. The most dangerous moment for any spy is when they stop being suspicious of everyone around them. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford, even with his closest collaborators. 2 days before the world changed, Mielke gathered his inner circle for a meeting that would reshape European history. The operation had a deceptively gentle code name, Rose. But Operation Rose wasn't about flowers. It was about sealing an entire population inside their own country, and doing it so efficiently that resistance would become impossible. The official story spoke of protection against fascist threats. The photographs tell a different tale. They show a man who understood that the most effective prison is one where the inmates never fully realize they're trapped. How do you convince 2.5 million people to stop trying to escape? You don't just build walls. You build the illusion that escape was never really possible in the first place. The meeting minutes from Operation Rose reveal something chilling. Enemy forces are to be apprehended immediately, without fuss, and by any means necessary. The phrase, "without fuss," is particularly telling. It suggests that even the arrests should appear routine, unremarkable. This wasn't just about stopping people from leaving. It was about making their desire to leave seem irrational, even to themselves. Within hours, combat groups took visible positions along the border. But the real work happened in the shadows, where Mielke's agents began implementing a psychological operation that would last decades. The photographs from those first days show something interesting. While soldiers built visible barriers, other figures worked behind the scenes, setting up systems that would prove far more durable than concrete and barbed wire. They were building something that would outlast any physical wall, a culture of mutual surveillance, where neighbors watched neighbors, and trust became a luxury no one could afford. The ministry's preparation for Operation Rose revealed a sophisticated understanding of mass psychology. They had studied previous uprisings, analyzed the patterns of resistance, and identified the key moments when popular movements either gained momentum or collapsed. The strategy was elegant in its simplicity: prevent the formation of any collective identity among those who might resist. Individual dissatisfaction was manageable. Organized opposition was dangerous. So the ministry designed its operations to isolate potential resistors, to make each person feel alone in their doubts about the system. The photographs show agents conducting what appeared to be routine house searches, but the timing was crucial. These searches happened simultaneously across multiple neighborhoods, creating the impression of omnipresent surveillance, while actually targeting specific individuals who had been identified as potential organizers. But perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of Operation Rose was how it transformed the meaning of the border itself. Before August 1961, the border was simply a line on a map. After Operation Rose, it became a psychological barrier that existed as much in people's minds as in physical reality. The ministry understood that the most effective borders aren't just physical obstacles. They're mental constructs that shape how people think about possibility itself. By making the border seem absolute, permanent, and inevitable, they were reshaping the imagination of an entire population. Even the timing of the operation was psychologically calculated. August is vacation season, when people are typically focused on leisure rather than politics. By acting when public attention was elsewhere, the ministry minimized the risk of spontaneous resistance while maximizing the shock value of their actions. The photographs document another crucial element: the creation of what intelligence professionals call plausible deniability. Every action taken during Operation Rose could be explained as a response to external threats, as defensive rather than aggressive. This wasn't just political cover. It was psychological preparation for the agents themselves, who needed to believe they were protecting rather than imprisoning their own people. Beneath the streets of Berlin, a different kind of conflict was taking place. While the world focused on the visible wall above ground, Mielke's true battlefield lay in the tunnels below. Each escape attempt became a case study in psychological warfare. The ministry didn't just want to stop people from fleeing. They wanted to turn the very act of hoping for freedom into a trap. Consider the case of a tunnel discovered in 1962. The official reports describe a straightforward operation. Agents waited underground, shots were fired, and an escape helper lost his life. But the details reveal something more calculated. The ministry had known about the tunnel for weeks. They could have simply sealed it or arrested the diggers immediately. Instead, they chose to wait, to let the operation proceed until the moment of maximum psychological impact. Why? Because stopping one escape attempt was less valuable than demonstrating the futility of all escape attempts. The message wasn't just that this particular tunnel had failed, but that every tunnel would fail. That hope itself was a form of collaboration with the enemy. The photographs from these operations show agents examining abandoned equipment, gas masks, tools, personal belongings left behind by people who had dared to dream of freedom. These weren't just evidence of crimes. They were trophies in a war against imagination. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of these underground operations was how they transformed the helpers themselves. Some were genuine idealists, risking everything to reunite families. Others were already working for the ministry, playing both sides of a game where the rules were never clearly defined. How do you tell the difference between a genuine escape helper and a state provocateur? The answer is, you don't, and that uncertainty was precisely the point. The ministry's underground operations revealed a sophisticated understanding of human psychology under extreme stress. They had studied how people behave when they believe they're engaged in clandestine resistance, and they used that knowledge to manipulate both genuine resistors and unwitting collaborators. The tunnel networks became laboratories for testing loyalty, courage, and betrayal. Each operation was designed to reveal not just who was trying to escape, but who was willing to help, who could be trusted with secrets, and who would crack under pressure. The photographs document something particularly chilling: the ministry's collection of personal items taken from tunnel sites. Wedding rings, family photographs, children's toys. These objects tell stories of desperate hope, of families torn apart by political circumstance, of people willing to risk everything for a chance at reunion. But the ministry wasn't just collecting evidence. They were building psychological profiles of their own population, studying what motivated people to take extraordinary risks. Every abandoned tunnel became a source of intelligence about human nature itself. The underground war also revealed the ministry's capacity for what modern intelligence analysts call strategic deception. They would sometimes allow certain escape attempts to succeed, carefully choosing which ones to stop and which ones to permit. This created a pattern that was impossible for escape organizers to decode. Success seemed random, which made it even more psychologically devastating than consistent failure. Random punishment is far more effective at controlling behavior than predictable punishment, because it creates a state of constant uncertainty. The ministry understood that the most effective way to control a population isn't to make resistance impossible, but to make it unpredictable. When people can't calculate the odds of success, they become paralyzed by the complexity of their choices. The photographs from tunnel operations show agents working with scientific precision, documenting every detail of each attempt. But this wasn't just about building legal cases. It was about refining their understanding of human behavior under extreme duress. Each failed escape attempt provided data that would be used to prevent future attempts. The ministry was learning from its targets, adapting its methods based on the creativity and desperation of those it sought to control. The underground war transformed Berlin into a city where the surface reality and the subterranean reality operated according to completely different rules. Above ground, life appeared normal, even prosperous. Below ground, a shadow conflict raged that would determine the fate of thousands of people who simply wanted to choose where they lived. The checkpoint looked routine. Friendly border guards checking passports, asking casual questions about travel plans. Most visitors saw nothing more than bureaucratic efficiency. But every friendly conversation was actually an interrogation. Every casual question was designed to extract information that would later be analyzed, categorized, and filed away for future use. The genius of Mielke's system wasn't its brutality, but its invisibility. 7,000 agents worked at border crossings, but they didn't look like agents. They looked like helpful civil servants, perhaps a bit more thorough than necessary, but essentially harmless. The real sophistication lay in what happened after each encounter. Every conversation was analyzed for inconsistencies. Every traveler was cross-referenced against existing files. Every innocent remark was examined for hidden meanings. This created something unprecedented. The intelligence-gathering operation that appeared to be normal government procedure. Travelers often left these encounters feeling that they'd had pleasant interactions with efficient officials, never realizing that they'd just been systematically analyzed by professional intelligence operatives. The psychological impact was profound. When surveillance becomes indistinguishable from routine administrative procedure, resistance becomes almost impossible to conceptualize. How do you fight something that doesn't appear to be an enemy? The photographs from these operations show agents in ordinary uniforms, sitting at ordinary desks, processing ordinary paperwork. Yet each piece of paper represented another thread in a web that eventually encompassed millions of people. By the 1970s, the ministry's filing system contained detailed information on virtually every person who had ever crossed the border. But more than that, it contained psychological profiles, relationship maps, and behavioral predictions that would have impressed any modern data analytics company. The border had become a laboratory for understanding human behavior, and every person who crossed it was an unwitting research subject. The ministry's growth during the 1970s wasn't just about adding personnel. It was about creating a new kind of social organism, where surveillance became so pervasive that it started to function like a natural ecosystem. Between 1970 and 1980, the number of official employees doubled to 80,000. But the real expansion was in the network of informal collaborators, neighbors who reported on neighbors, friends who documented conversations, family members who filed reports on their own relatives. This wasn't just about creating informants. It was about creating a society where the possibility of being watched was constant, where every private moment carried the potential for public scrutiny. The psychological effect was extraordinary. When you can't tell who might be reporting on you, you begin to modify your behavior not just in public, but in private as well. You start to monitor your own thoughts, to question your own reactions, to become your own surveillance agent. The photographs from this period show something fascinating. Ordinary people at ordinary social gatherings, but with expressions that suggest a constant underlying tension. Everyone looks slightly guarded, slightly performative, as if they're aware that this moment might be documented and analyzed later. This created what intelligence professionals call a panopticon effect. When the possibility of surveillance becomes universal, actual surveillance becomes almost unnecessary. People begin to police themselves, but the system had an unexpected consequence. As surveillance became more total, it also became more fragile. The ministry found itself watching not just potential dissidents, but also its own watchers. agents began filing reports on other agents, creating recursive loops of suspicion that eventually consumed enormous resources. By the 1980s, the ministry was spending more energy monitoring its own personnel than tracking genuine security threats. The watchers were watching the watchers, and no one was entirely sure who was really in charge. The Red Album's final photographs show a man who had built an empire of shadows, only to discover that shadows eventually disappear when the light changes. By 1989, Mielke's perfect system was consuming itself. The same psychological mechanisms that had made resistance seem impossible were now making reform seem impossible as well. The ministry had become so efficient at controlling information that it had lost the ability to process reality. When thousands of people began fleeing through Hungary and Czechoslovakia, the ministry's response revealed the fundamental weakness of any surveillance state. It can tell you what people are doing, but it can't tell you what they're thinking. The final photographs in the album show celebration of the wall's anniversary, but the faces tell a different story. Even the officials look uncertain, as if they're participating in a ritual whose meaning they no longer fully understand. But there's something else in these final images that reveals the ultimate irony of Mielke's career. The man who had spent decades studying human psychology, who had built a system based on predicting and controlling human behavior, had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the society he was trying to preserve. The ministry's files from 1989 show a system in crisis, but not the kind of crisis its creators had anticipated. They had prepared for armed rebellion, for coordinated resistance, for external invasion. They had not prepared for the simple human desire to see what lay beyond their borders. The psychological foundations of the surveillance state began to crumble when people stopped being afraid of the consequences of their curiosity. Fear had always been the ministry's most powerful weapon, but fear requires a certain kind of social isolation to remain effective. By the late 1980s, global communications had made that isolation impossible to maintain. People could see that others lived differently, that the dangers they had been warned about were largely imaginary, that the protection they had been promised was actually imprisonment. The photographs from the final months show something poignant. Ministry employees continuing their routines even as the world around them changed. They kept filing reports, conducting surveillance, analyzing intelligence, because the alternative was acknowledging that their entire professional lives had been built on a foundation of elaborate self-deception. On the night of November 9, 1989, a single lieutenant colonel made a decision that dismantled 3 decades of carefully constructed psychological control. He opened a border crossing because thousands of people were demanding entry, and no one had prepared him for that possibility. The ministry had planned for armed resistance, for organized rebellion, for coordinated enemy action. But they hadn't planned for the simple human desire to see what lay on the other side of a wall. Where was Erich Mielke that night? No one knows. The man who had insisted on knowing everything had somehow missed the most important moment in his country's history. The final irony is captured in the album's last photograph, a celebration of the wall's anniversary, taken just months before the wall's collapse. The image shows officials smiling and applauding, but their eyes reveal a different truth. They look like people who are beginning to suspect that they've been living in a carefully constructed illusion. The ministry's final reports, discovered after the regime's collapse, reveal a system that had become so sophisticated at deception that it had deceived itself. The agents had become so skilled at manipulating reality that they had lost the ability to recognize it. In the end, the surveillance state collapsed, not because it was overthrown, but because it became unable to distinguish between its own propaganda and actual conditions. The watchers had been watching so intently that they had forgotten to see. The Red Album remains in the Berlin archives, a testament to the illusion that perfect surveillance creates perfect control. But the photographs raise questions that their creator never intended. What happens when the watchers become so focused on watching that they forget to see? And what kind of power is it that can document everything except its own ending? Perhaps the most disturbing lesson of Mielke's career isn't about the dangers of surveillance, but about the seductive nature of systematic control itself. The album suggests that he genuinely believed he was protecting his people, that his surveillance network was a form of care rather than oppression. The line between protection and control, between security and imprisonment, may be thinner than we'd like to believe. And in a world where surveillance technology grows more sophisticated each year, Mielke's Red Album serves as a reminder that the most dangerous prison is often the one we build ourselves, one photograph at a time. The album's pages, worn from decades of viewing, remind us that the most insidious aspect of any surveillance state isn't its ability to watch us, but its ability to convince us that being watched is normal, necessary, even desirable. The photographs that once documented triumph now serve as evidence of a different kind of truth, that the most effective control is often the kind that makes resistance unthinkable rather than impossible. In the end, Mielke's Red Album tells a story that its creator never intended. The story of how a system designed to control human behavior ultimately revealed the limits of that control. The photographs preserve not just moments in history, but moments when history revealed that human nature cannot be permanently suppressed, only temporarily contained. The shadows that once seemed so powerful, so permanent, proved to be nothing more than the absence of light. And when the light finally changed, the shadows simply disappeared, leaving behind only the evidence of what had been hidden in darkness for so long.